Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for your quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we explore the key findings from the 2025 Women in the Workplace report from LeanIn and McKinsey and what they tell us about the reality facing women in corporate America right now. Let's break it down. The Women in the Workplace report is the largest long-running study of women in corporate roles. Over 11 years, more than 1,000 companies and almost 500,000 employees have participated. In the 2025 edition, the researchers collected data from 124 organizations that employ about 3 million people, surveyed 9,500 employees, and interviewed 62 HR leaders. The top-line story is that corporate America is at real risk of rolling backwards on gender equity, at exactly the same time AI and other forces are reshaping how work gets done. Only about half of companies say that advancing women's careers is now a high priority, and an even smaller share are prioritizing the advancement of women of color. At the same time, progress and representation is stalled at the top. Women remain underrepresented at every level of the pipeline, and they still hold only about 29% of C-suite roles. That's essentially flat from last year. The broken rung at the first step up to manager level remains intact. For every 100 men promoted into first-line management, only 93 women make that move, and the numbers are even worse for Black women and Latinas. That early disadvantage compounds over time and helps explain why men still significantly outnumber women at every leadership level. One of the clearest threads in this year's report is that women receive less of the career support that actually moves people forward. Entry-level women are less likely than men to have a sponsor at all, and much less likely to have multiple sponsors or a sponsor in a senior role. And senior colleagues are less likely to connect early career women to influential contacts, to recommend them for stretch assignments, or to put them forward for promotions. Not surprisingly, only about 3 in 10 entry-level women say they have been promoted in the last 2 years, compared with more than 4 in 10 men at the same level. The report calls this a double promotion gap, because women are less likely to be promoted while still in entry-level roles, and then also face lower odds at making the first jump to manager. The story is similar and in some ways more troubling for women of color. Mid-career Asian women, for example, report receiving less career-building support from more senior colleagues than other women at the same level, and they are less likely to have managers who focus on their advancement or provide actionable feedback. Across 5 years of pipeline data, Asian women are less likely than women overall to reach the VP level. The report notes that persistent stereotypes about Asian women being less assertive can create a double bind, where they are penalized whether they speak up or stay quiet. Black women in leadership stand out for especially high levels of burnout and job insecurity, with nearly 8 in 10 reporting frequent burnout and even more expressing concern about their job stability. At the other end of the pipeline, women in leadership are also missing critical support. Senior level women are less likely than men to say their managers are transparent about what it takes to advance, to say that their manager advocates for their work, or to report being offered leadership or career training in the past 2 years. Given how much influence managers have on visibility, stretch opportunities, and promotion decisions, these gaps at the top can limit women's ability to move in the most senior roles or to sustain their performance and well-being once they get there. The 2025 report also services a new and unusual trend. For the first time, there's an ambition gap between women and men. Overall, about 80% of women say they want to be promoted to the next level, compared with 86% of men, with the largest gaps at the entry and senior levels. Young women at the beginning of their careers are actually more ambitious than young men, but for women who are over 40 and still at the entry level, interest in advancement drops sharply. The analysis makes it clear that this is not about drive or talent. When women receive equivalent sponsorship and manager support, their desire to advance looks almost identical to men's. The gap in ambition is strongly linked to uneven access to opportunity, to extra responsibilities at home, and to senior women's perception that the top jobs are both harder to reach and more likely to come with burnout and dissatisfaction. Another disturbing pattern is what the report calls flexibility stigma. Women, especially at the entry level, are more likely than men to work mostly remotely. When they do, they are significantly less likely to have sponsors and far less likely to report a promotion in the past 2 years than women who spend most of their time on site. Men, by contrast, see relatively similar levels of sponsorship and promotion, whether they work remotely or in the office. The data suggests that when women take advantage of flexible work, colleagues and leaders are more likely to question their commitment, while men's dedication is taken for granted. That can turn what should be a retention and inclusion tool into another barrier to advancement for women. The report also documents a year of unusually high burnout and anxiety. Across levels, many employees say they are worried about their job security and their ability to find a new role if needed, and those concerns are highest among senior-level women. Among women leaders with shorter tenure at their company, about 70% report frequent burnout, and more than 80% are worried about their job security. Add to that the fact that many entry and mid-level women feel less safe to disagree, to take risks, or to make mistakes, and you get a picture of a workplace where women are still walking a narrow line. Many women, particularly Black women, and women with disabilities or chronic health conditions, worry that aspects of their identity will limit their opportunities to advance. However, there are some hopeful findings. Over the past decade, representation for women has improved, especially in companies that treat gender diversity and women's advancement as core business priorities. Organizations in the top quartile for women's representation see faster gains at almost every level, helped by consistent use of evidence-based practices such as clear promotion criteria, bias training for evaluators, tracking outcomes, and explicit accountability for leaders. Most employees, women and men, also strongly agree that workplaces should be fair and respectful, that hiring and promotion should be free from bias and favoritism, and that diverse perspectives lead to better decisions. Where employees see high levels of fairness and inclusion, they are more motivated to do their best work, more willing to take risks and to speak up, and less likely to feel burned out or to consider leaving. So what should HR leaders and senior teams actually do with all this information? The report lays out a fairly clear roadmap built around two fundamentals: fairness of opportunity and an inclusive culture. On the fairness side, it calls for hiring and promotion processes that are truly merit-based and consistently applied. That means structuring interviews and performance reviews, being explicit about criteria, using quantifiable ratings where appropriate, training evaluators to recognize and interrupt their biases, and regularly auditing outcomes for patterns that disadvantage women, especially women of color. It also means broadening talent pools by questioning unnecessary degree requirements, reviewing job postings for coded language that might deter candidates, and being intentional about referrals and sourcing so that existing networks do not simply replicate themselves. As AI tools spread through recruiting and performance management, the report also urges companies to actively assess how those tools might reinforce or reduce bias, and to put clear guidelines and safeguards in place rather than assuming AI is neutral. A second opportunity is equipping managers to be real career accelerators. Managers need the time, training, and tools to have meaningful conversations about development, to provide specific feedback, to connect people to stretch work, and to advocate for their teams. Right now, only about 1/3 of employees say they get that support consistently. The report also encourages organizations to clear low-value tasks off managers' plates, build coaching and inclusion skills into manager onboarding, and to provide simple resources like conversation guides and templates that make these behaviors easier to practice. The report also notes that incentives matter. Very few companies formally reward managers for developing people and for distributing opportunities fairly, and for doing things like creating inclusive team dynamics, even though those behaviors directly affect retention, performance, and equity. The third big recommendation is to invest in authentic sponsorship and connection. Employees with sponsors are nearly twice as likely to have been promoted in the last 2 years, but women are less likely to have any sponsor at all and less likely to have sponsors in more senior roles. The report calls on companies to build robust sponsorship programs that carefully match sponsors and sponsees, clarify expectations on both sides, and offer training so sponsors know how to open doors and sponsees know how to ask for what they need. Organizations should also look for ways to broaden informal networks, from structured networking events during work hours to intentional use of employee resource groups and peer circles. Done well, these programs can expose senior leaders to a wider range of talent, give women more access to decision makers, and build empathy across differences. And finally, the report emphasizes inclusion as an everyday practice and not just a slogan. It highlights 3 simple but powerful principles: acceptance, respect, and empathy. Employees need to see that people of all backgrounds are welcome and appreciated, that their time and contributions are treated as valuable, and that colleagues are curious and responsive to each other's experiences. HR leaders can support that with research-backed inclusion training, clear expectations for how meetings are run and who gets heard, and strong, well-resourced employee resource groups that help build community and give leaders a place to listen and learn. When leaders speak often and authentically about why fairness and inclusion matter, and when they personally model the behaviors they expect from others, changes are more likely to stick. The conclusion of the 2025 report is pretty blunt. It argues that we are at a critical moment where corporate America could easily slide backwards on women just as AI is transforming work. What leaders choose to do in 2026 will shape the future of women in the workplace and, by extension, the future of their organizations. Companies that truly invest in women and use AI to root out bias rather than entrench it will be better positioned to attract and keep talent and outperform their competitors. This has been a long episode, but I want to wrap it up with a direct challenge, especially to male leaders who are listening. Most senior leaders are still men, and many of them believe women are already well represented in leadership when the data clearly says otherwise. If you hold power in your organization, this report is asking you to do more than simply agree that fairness and inclusion are good ideas. It's asking you to take a hard look at who you sponsor, who you promote, who you assume is ready. It's asking you to challenge flexibility stigma, to support remote and hybrid arrangements without penalizing women for using them, to insist on structured and transparent decision-making, and to show up visibly in inclusion initiatives. Above all, it's asking you to treat gender equity and inclusion as core to your job, not just a side project for HR. The decision you make and the example you set will determine whether the next generation inherits workplaces that are fair, equitable, and safe for everyone, or whether we tell them that progress for women was something we cared about only when it was convenient. Thanks so much for listening, and a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. If this episode made you think about how your organization is showing up for women in your workplace, please share it with a colleague. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.